So, I'm Doug Fairbairn. I'm here to interview Bill Krause and record his oral history. The date is February 4th, 2025. And Bill, we're delighted to have you here. We've already had a short conversation and I think there'll be a lot of interesting things to cover. So, in these oral histories, we always like to start at the very beginning. Where were you born? What was your family environment growing up? Especially in terms of things that might have influenced you or gotten you an early start towards a career that you eventually decided to pursue. So I'll turn it over to you and let you start off the oral history.
Well, let's see. Let's begin in the beginning. I was born in Philadelphia, dependent of military parents. I went to kindergarten in Japan in 1947. And then I graduated from high school in Germany in 1959, went to college Charleston, South Carolina at the Citadel, and I lived about 6 places in between.
So let's just go back there. You were born in Philadelphia, your father was in the military, and you went to Japan. How long did you stay in Japan?
I was there for 2 years. I actually started in kindergarten, but for whatever reason, maybe I was too smart or something, I skipped kindergarten, went directly into first grade. So I was always a year ahead of everyone in terms of age, which was a little bit of a disadvantage because I liked athletics and sports. And so I was sort of 1 year behind everybody in terms of physical development.
What year were you born?
1942.
So you were too young to pick up Japanese much at the time, or?
No, Doito Shimasto, Arigato gozaimasu. I still remember some. My younger brother spoke Japanese before he spoke English.
Interesting. And then you left Japan and went to?
So let's see, we left Japan and we went back to Philadelphia, where I went to Catholic school, Incarnation, in the 2nd grade, and St. Timothy's in the 3rd grade. And I lived on a street. I was into athletics, and I lived on a street where a person by the name of Kurt Simmons, who was a left-handed pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies.
Oh, yeah.
So I became a fan of the Philadelphia Phillies. And so, all right, so if we want to continue the story from there, so there we went from Philadelphia to Blackstone, Virginia. Actually, we moved to a little small town called Jetersville, Virginia. We lived on a farm, and I went to Amelia County Courthouse School, which was a school that had grades all the way from the 1st grade up through 12th grade. And I don't want to over-dramatize this, but I was from Philadelphia, and this is in 1950s, and I was a Yankee. And so frequently, the farm boys who were Southern would pick on me, and I would get picked on and basically get beat up. But I was a good marble player, and so I would have marble tournaments and take them on playing marbles, and so all of a sudden I became one of the guys because I could play marbles. We moved from Jetersville to the base that my father was stationed at called Camp Pickett. And so we moved on to base at Camp Pickett, and we were there for a couple of years. I got an autographed baseball from a person by the name of Don Newcomb, who played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Then, I forgot. Let's see. When did we do? Oh, that was before where did that come in? Oh, so I was born in Philadelphia. We went to Jefferson Barracks before we went to Japan. Forgot about that. We were in Jefferson Barracks from 45 to 47, and then we went to Japan in 47. So my younger brother was born in Jefferson Parish. Okay, so let's go back to the early 50s. We're at Camp Pickett. We moved from Camp Pickett to the Presidio in San Francisco, although initially we couldn't get a residence on the Presidio base itself. So we lived in a town called Broadmoor, which is near Daly City. And I went to Westlake Elementary, which still exists today. They had split school. So I would go to school in the morning, and then there'd be a session in the afternoon. And I had a paper route in the afternoon so I could make money. But at any rate, then we moved on to the Presidio, where I went to Marina Junior High School. And Marina Junior High School sort of became a little bit famous because during the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, all the people that had to leave their homes were housed at Marina Junior High School while they rebuilt stuff. But at any rate, so I went to junior high at Marina Junior High School. I dated a woman, God, I forget the name of the restaurant. It was very famous. Her parents owned a very famous restaurant in San Francisco. All right, so then at the Presidio is when I really got my athletic career going, principally playing baseball and basketball. And then in 1956, we moved to Germany. We moved to a town called Bad Kreuznach in Germany, which was an army base. And the way it worked was if your parents were in the army, you had to go to an army-dependent military school. And the closest one was in a town called Kaiserslautern. Kaiserslautern is next door to a town called Ramstein, which other people may have heard of. That's a Air Force base where a lot of people from during the Iraq War and so forth, that people were taken there for medical services. But anyway, so I'm a sophomore and a junior at Kaiserslautern, and
so you were in a military school. You didn't have to learn German, or everything was in English.
No, it was a military school, but it was all English. Although I did have a German teacher by the name of Frau Schwippert, which I happen to remember. Let's see, ich wohne in Deutschland für 3 Jahre. Ich gehe nach Schule in Kaiserslautern and Wiesbaden, so I still remember a little bit of my German. But anyway, again, I was continuing my activities in athletics, baseball and basketball. But the challenge at Kaiserslautern was we lived in a dormitory, and we would go down on Sunday night, come back Friday night. And so the challenge was a lot of the young women students were getting pregnant. And so the parents figured we have to figure out a better solution to this problem. So they worked out a deal with the Air Force so that the students from Bad Kreuznach could go to school in an Air Force school which was located in Wiesbaden. Wiesbaden High School was called. So then in my senior year, I went to Wiesbaden High School, and I was quite an athlete there.
In baseball and basketball?
And I played football also, but I wasn't very good in football. Football, basketball, baseball. But interesting story at Wiesbaden. So we commuted on a day-to-day basis by bus, drive up in the bus. But those of us that played sports, we had a van that would come after practice and pick us up and bring us back. Sometimes the van was a little late, and so if we'd finished practice, we would go down to the Non-Commissioned Officers Club, because there happened to be a rock and roll group there. It was the, just a middle block, Come Go With Me. Their famous song was the Come Go With Me, but I'm drawing a mental block on the name of the group. But 3 of the members of the group were all in the Air Force at the same time. And so they would go down the Non-Commissioned Officers Club, and sort of they would hang out, and they would just play music and enjoy. So we go down there one afternoon, and they're playing, and we look over to the side of where they're hanging out, and there's this guy with a guitar playing the guitar, Elvis Presley.
He was in the Army at that time.
He was in the Army. He was stationed in Frankfurt, and he was dating a woman by the name of Priscilla, who was a freshman at Wiesbaden High School.
Oh my gosh. And
so, anyway, that was sort of an interesting experience at Wiesbaden. So I graduated from Wiesbaden.
That's where he met Priscilla, huh?
That's where that's where he met Priscilla. And we had our 20th anniversary of Wiesbaden High School. I graduated in 1959, so this would be 1979 in Las Vegas.
So you graduated in 59 and you had the 20th anniversary?
20 years later, we had a reunion in Las Vegas, and Priscilla came and performed. But at any rate, we've now graduated from high school, and I knew my parents. I wasn't quite sure where my father was going to be stationed, so I applied to school on the East Coast and on the West Coast. And I tried to apply to West Point. My father wanted me to go to West Point, but you have to be appointed by one of your congresspeople. And I was third on the list, and so I didn't get into West Point. But I had applied and been accepted with a scholarship at Florida State. And I had actually gone down to the dormitory, checked in, and this was in August of 1959. And I come back, and my father says, "Hey, I heard about this school up in Charleston called the Citadel. It's a military school. Why don't we go and take a look?" So we go up and take a look, and it was in August, and so this was during summer school. And so there were co-eds on campus going to summer school, and people were going around Bermuda shorts and T-shirts and stuff. And I said, "Well, this is kind of cool. You know, you wear a uniform to impress people, impress the young women, and then you can be casual wearing your Bermuda shorts and T-shirts." Well, then 2 weeks later, I show up to go to school there for what would be called, at West Point's called Plebe Week. What would we call it? We called it Hell Week is what we called it. And this is 1959. And to not speak disparagingly about the Citadel, Pat Conroy, by the way, who also is a famous author, went to the Citadel. He wrote some books about the Citadel, and it was pretty severe hazing in terms of your freshman experience. But in any case, I went there, and so when I got there on campus, they couldn't find my SATs. So I had to take a test, to gauge whether or not I academically could attend this school. It was a 2.5, 3-hour test. So I take the test. While they're grading the test, why don't you go down to the athletic department, meet the athletic director, Coach Teague, Eddie Teague. So I go meet Coach Teague, and so he's interviewing me to see whether or not I could. He had all of his scholarships filled, but maybe I could get a partial scholarship. So I found this out later, but the phone rings, and he says, "Yep, okay, yep, got it, okay." Hangs up. Turns out it was the dean of the college calling Coach Teague to say, "This kid's pretty smart. If you can find a way to give him a partial scholarship, we'd really like to have him in school." So Coach Teague says, "Well, look, if you play both basketball and baseball, we'll give you a partial scholarship." So, okay, fine. So I get accepted to go to school there, go back to, we were stationed at a place called Fort Stewart, Georgia. That's where we were stationed at that time. 2 weeks later, I come back to go to Hell Week, and I show up. I didn't see any co-eds. I didn't see any Bermuda shorts. I didn't see any T-shirts. And I learned what it was like to be a freshman at the Citadel. And fortunately, I got through my freshman year. I was a pretty good student. I was sort of I had a misspent youth. And growing up as a teenager, I specialized in 4 Bs: baseball, basketball, beer, and broads. Not necessarily in that order, but in any case. But going to the Citadel was a godsend because it taught me discipline. It taught me perseverance. And it taught me that in order to succeed in life, you had to have goals that you aspired to. And so it was a profound experience actually going to the Citadel. It's a small school, so it's not a big thing, but I'm among the top 3 donors to the school, so I have a lot of connection there and been on their foundation board for 20 plus some years. But in any case, so I graduate from the Citadel in 1963. But however, let me pause there to see if you want to raise any questions.
Yeah, actually,
about
you did. That's a good point. I'm curious as to, you mentioned what your focus was in the 4 Bs, but you picked this school, didn't sound like on the basis of what career you wanted to pursue, or what, it was just you were just attracted to it on sort of more fundamental grounds. Did you have an idea? Did you have any electronics background growing up? Did you build any Heath kits? I mean, or were you just having fun?
I was just having fun. I was a misspent youth. I had no clue about electronics. I had no clue. It was the 4 Bs, and that was it. But the reason I went to the Citadel is because my father wanted me to go to a military school, A, and B, given my misspent youth, he had the foresight to realize that I would benefit tremendously from the discipline of going to a military school. I forgot to mention, when I took this test and they accepted me, the dean of the school, his name was Colonel Duckett, actually, I pulled that out, Colonel Duckett. And he said, "What do you want to major in?" I said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "Well, you were really good in math, but we don't have very many people in the double E department, so why don't you major in double E, electrical engineering?" So that's how I got to be in the double E department. So I did wind up getting a bachelor's of science in electrical engineering. So I did begin to understand a little bit about electronics.
Now, was that really electronics? I mean, did they have any semiconductors, or was this about vacuum tubes, or what does electronics look like at that time?
They had just developed something called the transistor. And so we would build breadboards around discrete components and transistors in one of our double E labs. So we were just getting accustomed to the concept of transistors. But again, I still really didn't have a good idea of what I wanted to do when I grew up. I'll get to that a little bit as we go a bit further. All I knew that I wanted to graduate from school. I had an obligatory 2-year military duty. When I graduated, I wound up working for 3 months before I went into military duty at Duke Power Company. So I got some experience in understanding how power companies work, transformers and switchgear and things of that nature. And then I had to go into military duty September 1963. I reported for duty in Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. I was in the Air Defense Corps, as it was called then, and my experience in the Army was also foundational to my career, business career. My assignment, I was a second lieutenant, and I was assigned to a unit that was responsible for flying what would become known as drones. At that time, they were called RCATs, radio-controlled aircraft targets. And my platoon was responsible for building these RCATs and flying them down a missile range where at Fort Bliss, missile units would come in and practice bringing up their missile unit and then actually firing a live missile downrange to hit the RCAT. And then we would have to go out into the range, recover the RCAT, bring it back, and rebuild it. So I show up for my first day at work at this military unit, It's called a platoon in a company. And the company sergeant, welcomes me. And so I said, "Sergeant, what can I do to be of help here?" He pauses and he says, "Lieutenant, if you can make sure we have hot coffee and a good breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a hot shower at night, and you stay out of the way, you'll be golden." So what I learned was that my job as a manager of this platoon of 30-some people was to create the environment where they could be successful. It was sort of an upside-down organization. I'm at the bottom of the organization, and my job is to make sure they had all the tools and in the environment to execute on their job and do a good job of it. And it was a fabulous learning experience in terms of Management 101. Continuing the story, so I finished my military duty 2 years later, September 1965, and now I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to really do when I grow up? So I wound up, I don't know how many companies I applied to, but I wound up going to General Electric Company. They had a management training program, and my father thought that would be good for me to sort of learn about business. And it was a manufacturing training program. And here I'm sort of beginning to get a hazy idea of what I might want to do with my life. And so I'm now, 1965, so I'm now 23 years old. So I'm going to work for 40-some years, 45 years, say. So let's divide my working career up into 3 phases of 15 years each. 45 was only divisible by 3 and 15, so let's figure out 3 phases of 15 years each. First phase would be learning about business. The second phase would be about building a business. And the third phase would be giving back in some form. So going to General Electric to learn about business and its manufacturing training program sort of fit into this hazy vision that I had about what my life's work would be about. So that took me back to Philadelphia, where I worked in a power circuit breaker plant in South Philadelphia. And again, my experience, I was a foreman, and the people that worked on the products that I was responsible for were all in their late 20s, mid 30s, early 40s. And again, I had the experience of my job was to create the environment where they could be successful. Stay out of the way, help them achieve what they needed to achieve, and make sure they had all the tools they needed to get the job done. So, all right, so
was this team designing products or running?
No, this was building, manufacturing.
Manufacturing, got it, okay.
Manufacturing training program. So I was on the shop floor helping people build stuff as a foreman. Turns out now, my father passes away in November of 1965. And so I'm beginning to wonder about life after that experience. People I was in the military with wound up working for Pan America and were living in San Francisco, working for Pan America. And they seemed to be having a lot more fun in San Francisco than I was in Philadelphia, even though I was from Philadelphia.
Back in Philadelphia. You keep coming back to Philadelphia, right?
And it turns out, my parents, my mother, let me digress here. My mother was was Italian, and she was from a very large Italian family. She had 4 siblings, 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters, and lots of uncles and cousins. But at any rate, so going to Philadelphia was comfortable. But at any rate, my friends from the military seemed to be having more fun in San Francisco. So So I got GE to transfer me to a plant they had in Oakland, making distribution transformers. And so I'm now living in San Francisco with my friends in a flat on Jackson Street in Pacific Heights in San Francisco. And the most important event of that era was meeting my wife. Because my wife, I met my wife in so now this is circa 1966. I met my wife at the end of 1966. That's a story I won't bother to go into, but it's a fun story. She was dating a person from a school called Virginia Military Institute, VMI, which is a competitive school to the Citadel. And she was dating a person who was an all-Southern Conference halfback. So I knew about him through my athletic endeavors. But at any rate, he had gone to, first she was dating, had gone to University of Virginia to get his medical degree. And he was going through San Francisco to do his internship in Hawaii. And my wife had gotten a job at UC Berkeley, working at the Berkeley Counseling Center, which is a very interesting experience in itself, at any rate. And he dropped her off at our flat to make sure we'd take care of her while he was in Hawaii. And so I made sure I took care of her. And so we got married in 1967. And that's when she said, you really have to make something of your life here. So I had left General Electric and gone to work for a small company called Technical Measurement Corporation. They were headquartered in Connecticut, and they made special purpose digital computers, pulse height analyzers, and digital signal averagers. And so I began to learn a little bit about computers. And I was a salesperson. I joined them as a salesperson, learned how to become a salesperson. And we wound up...
And you went there because?
Because, well, I had learned about engineering as an electrical engineer. I didn't want to be an engineer. I'd learned about manufacturing, and I knew that I didn't want to be in manufacturing. So what's left? Sales. So why don't I learn about sales? Because I'm building by learning about business. So I got a sales job for this company, and that's why I wound up going to technical business to learn how to be a salesperson. And I wound up being pretty good at it. But I learned lots of things. I had a fabulous sales manager who taught me a lot about the basic principles of selling. Fast forward, when we got married, I'd been transferred down to Los Angeles. And so my wife and I moved to Los Angeles, and we lived in an apartment, basically, so on 400 Veteran Avenue, right next door to UCLA campus. And the company I was working for, we're just not married, in August of 1967, and we moved to UCLA, to Los Angeles in August of 67. November of 1967, Technical Measurement Corporation goes bankrupt. So here I am, newly married, trying to impress my new bride, and the company I'm working for is bankrupt, and I'm out of work. And she was a teacher. Well, she was when she graduated, a graduate degree at University of Virginia, counseling and psychometry, but she had a teaching credential. But so she was doing part-time teaching. And so, well, okay, maybe I can do some Kelly Aid work. So I go down to the Kelly Aid, whatever it is, Kelly workshop. And they said, well, how many words a minute can you type? Well, I can unpack. Well, can you run copiers? Well, I probably can. Well, we don't have any jobs you're qualified here in the office, doing administrative work. Why don't you go down to our direct labor division, see if you can do any work down there. So I go down there and say, oh, you're too skinny, you can't do any work down here. So I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And I applied to be a Santa Claus. So we're now getting close to Christmas. I tried to be, through the Salvation Army, to be a Santa Claus. And you didn't have a good enough ho-ho-ho. I applied for a sales job at Bullock's, right outside of UCLA, but they only took part-time people that were going to school at UCLA. Yeah, it was a department, Bullock's department, to sell shoes. But they only took students out of UCLA, so I didn't get that. Well, fast forward, so I'm starting to get some offers from some companies. And the special purpose digital computers I was selling happened to compete with a very new business that HP was getting into. And they had happened to develop and were marketing a special purpose pulse height analyzer, used principally for nuclear medicine applications. And so they had heard about me, and I had gotten a offer from Hewlett-Packard to go to work for them as a salesperson. But the compensation, the salary they offered me was the lowest of the other offers I had. One of which was, by the way, Texas Instruments. And the person who interviewed me there, who was the head of sales at the time, became the head of sales at a company called Fairchild.
Don Valentine? Don Valentine?
No, one Don Valentine. I'm drawing a block on his name. Don Valentine comes in later. But at any rate, so he shows up later in my life. I'll get back to that. But at any rate, so I was struggling with going to work at HP. And so the person I was to work for, a person by the name of Bill Nelson, thought, why don't you come in and meet my boss, a person by the name of Bob Boniface. And their office was in North Hollywood, near in Los Angeles. So I go in to meet Bob, and so Bob says, well, we'd really like to hire you and have you come on to work here at Hewlett-Packard. But I understand you're having an issue with our starting salary, which, by the way, is completely competitive. You're starting at the same level as anybody else in your position, but help me understand what the issue was. And I said, well, I just got married, and the company I was working for went bankrupt. And so I don't have any money, and I'd really like to be able to buy my wife, some Christmas presents at Christmas time. And so Bob says, I can solve that problem for you. I can put you to work starting today, December the 5th, 1967, write you a check for your first month's payroll, December the 5th to December the 5th to December the 31st, give you a check to walk out with today, but the starting salary is still the same. Another profound experience about management. I learned about being a hard-headed businessman, but a soft-hearted people person. And so I accepted the job and joined HP.
So that date is very well emblazoned in your memory, December the 5th.
So at any rate, I didn't want to stay in Los Angeles. And the good news was the job that I had taken was in Palo Alto. So I moved back up to then Silicon Valley and to start my job. And the first day on work was January the 2nd, 1968. So I report to work, and I had a buddy there meet me to take me around and show me HP, is what that's called. And it came lunchtime, and so his name was Ed White. Ed White was my buddy, took me around. And so it came time for lunch, and we went to lunch in the company cafeteria, 1501 Page Mill. And so I go through the cafeteria line, and I sit down here. Across the table, Ed White sits down, and he says, Bill Krause, meet Bill Hewlett, sitting next to me. And so Bill Hewlett, being Bill Hewlett, says, oh, well, who are you? What are you doing? And so I said, well, I'm Bill Krause. I'm your first digital sales engineer. So at HP, everybody had to be an engineer. If you were in sales, you had to be a sales engineer. But they were starting and I was the first person to start a new category of sales called digital sales engineer. So I was the first person. And so Bill had heard about this. And so he was very interested in it. And he said, wow, you're going to be selling my pet project that I'm working on. And so he said, Ed, after lunch, can he come up to the lab and meet the guys and learn about this pet project? Sure, why not? So after lunch, I go up to the lab, and he's working on this project called the HP 9100A. And a guy by the name of Tom Osborne had brought this concept to HP about a device that could be pre-programmed and do all of your normal arithmetic functions, but do all the transcendental functions of logarithmic, trig, and other things as well. And turns out, another person working on the project, a person by the name of Tom Whitney, who became a very close friend of mine. And so Bill introduced me to all the people working on the project. Met Barney Oliver, who was the head of R&D of HP. Fast forward, so I go through my initial training program, and 4 months later, I'm now beginning my actual selling part of my career. And I'd be in my office, and the phone would ring. Hi, Bill Krause. Hi, Bill, this is Bill Hewlett. I'd like to go on a sales call. You want to come by and pick me up? Because the deal was that you couldn't call on a customer unless you brought the salesperson with you. And so Bill was so excited about this new product, the HP 9100A, that he would go out and show it to all of his friends in terms of telling them on buying it and using it. So I must have made, 10 or 15 sales calls with Bill Hewlett. And of course, learned all about the 9100A and learned about other things dealing with computers.
Before you go on, did you realize at the time that it was important to be in Silicon Valley? It wasn't even Silicon Valley then. That didn't happen until 5 years later, whatever. But was that a goal, or was that you were happy to be there? It didn't make any difference, or tell me about your perception of Hewlett-Packard and of Silicon Valley at that time.
Okay, so why Silicon Valley? Why HP? Well, HP, as I mentioned. There were a couple of things that attracted me about joining HP. One was Bob Boniface solved a problem I had, getting me a check that I could be able to buy Christmas presents for my wife. But two, I wanted to get back to the Bay Area, and the job was in the Bay Area. And Hewlett-Packard had this reputation as being a really great company to work for. And again, now after having been married and really begin to think about what I'm going to do in my life, this notion of my three phases of my working career sort of begin to be more crystallized. Learning about business, building a business, and then giving back. So what better way to learn about business than to work at Hewlett-Packard and learn about electronics and learn about what the world of computers was all about. Because I'd gotten a taste of it working at Technical Measurement Corporation, special purpose digital computers, and it became very clear to me that digital computers were a thing of the future. That was very clear to me. And so going to work at HP as their first digital sales engineer was an opportunity to continue this progression, learning about how to build businesses. And so that was sort of the thinking I had, but I was still pretty naive. Silicon Valley, as you said, wasn't Silicon Valley at that time. But HP had this phenomenal reputation. To wit, here I am, first day on the job, sitting next to Bill Hewlett, and he spends the afternoon with me in the lab going over his pet project and then making sales calls with me. So, again, what I learned was the organization is upside down. And I got a firsthand experience with an old acronym, MBWA, Management by Walking Around, because there was Bill Hewlett in the they're in the lunchroom when I was having lunch. But so HP was a great place to be. I was very successful. in sales. As I was learning more now about the digital computers themselves, 2116, as you mentioned earlier, was the first digital computer from HP. And part of learning about how to sell it, I had to go to a 2-week training class. And at this 2-week training class, I happened to meet a person by the name of Bill Davidow, who of course became well known at Intel and Davidow and more venture capital firm, more Davidow actually. I also happened to meet a person by the name of Tom Perkins, another person who became quite famous in Silicon Valley. But my 2-week course, part of it was learning how to program the 2116A in assembly language. And what I had to do was I had to write a program that allowed the 2116 to take readings off of a digital voltmeter, compute the average of the readings, and then print it out on a printer. So I got my first-hand experience in programming and had the fortunate benefit of meeting Bill Davidow and Tom Perkins. And I was the top salesperson for the division that sold the 2116. It was called the Palo Alto division at that time. And so I got to be well known by both Bill Davidow and Tom Perkins. Continuing my sales career, I was promoted to be a district sales manager in April of 1970. I was the youngest sales manager in the history of the Hewlett-Packard Company. Also, I think it was on the official promotion was on April 1st. On April the 3rd, I had a car accident and broke my femur, very severe accident. And so here I am, I'm supposed to be starting my management career as a digital sales manager, a district sales manager. But I'm in the hospital because the way they healed femurs back then was they put you in a bed in traction for 90 days.
90 days?
90 days in a bed in traction.
Holy cow. Now they kick you out after a day and go walk on it.
But my boss, Bill Nielsen, I was afraid I was going to lose my job. No way. Bill Nielsen said, don't worry, get well, we'll help you with I'll fill in for you while you're in the hospital. And so I asked to get a teletype and asked to get it hooked up to the telephone line next to my bed. And I wrote a program in BASIC for the hospital to automate patient entry and entering in patient names into a patient database. But anyway, I used to have district sales meetings with my salespeople in my hospital room. Anyway,
no Zoom calls.
I get healed. I heal. My leg gets healed, and so I'm back out now being a district sales manager. And then I get promoted to be a regional sales manager. And at that time, HP had multiple people. They had split the computer selling activities into 2 groups. One group was selling more to commercial companies, and another group was selling more to measurement companies. And they didn't think that was a good idea. They decided to combine it. And that gave me an opportunity to then progress to go to work in what was called the factory at that time, which was really working in the office at the computer division. It was called at that time, what was it called? It was Palo Alto division. Then it was called, I'm drawing a blank on what it was then called. But it was called, can't remember it. Maybe it was just called the computer division. But I was head of product marketing. And the product I was responsible for, the principal product, was the HP 3000 mini computer. And at the time that I came in to be responsible for this product line, they were taking back more of them than they were selling. The product had been released too early. The software wasn't ready to go. It was tagged the donkey with the golden saddle. Great software, but the hardware wasn't ready for it. And so we had to bring it back and do a complete redo of it. Dave Packard was very upset about all that because he prided himself on only introducing products that worked and provided quality to their customers. At any rate, so we got that all fixed. And so they then split the division into two divisions, General Systems Division and the Automatic Measurement Division. Oh, I know what it was. The division was called the Data Systems Division. That's what it was called. So when I went into the factory, it was called the Data Systems Division. And they had the HP 3000, the HP 2100 series, and I was responsible for both of those product lines.
What happened to the 9100A?
The 9100A, of course, well, I should have said more about the 9100A. And gosh, let's regress for a minute and go back to that. So we're going to regress back to 1968. So the 9100A was called the 9100A desktop calculator. Truth be known, it was the first desktop personal computer. But Bill Hewlett didn't believe that anyone would think that Hewlett-Packard made computers because IBM made computers. So he wasn't going to call it a computer, he was going to call it a desktop calculator. But however, I'm going to use some notes because I'm too old to remember all these things. So I'm going to use some notes to tell you about the 9100A. So the 9100A, it was released in 1968. It had 16 registers, 196 program steps that could be recorded on a magnetic card, 32 kilobit ROM, and 64 instructions. And you could program it to do different things. And so technically, it was really the first programmable desktop computer. But Bill Hewlett wasn't going to call it a computer, he called it a desktop calculator. So Air got born, HP's first foray into desktop computing. However, Bill Hewlett being Bill Hewlett, it wasn't enough to have that breakthrough product, the 9100A. So I want you to take this desktop computer, and I now want you to shrink it and put all of that functionality so it fits in my pocket. And hence was born, and I happen to have one, the HP 35. It was named the HP 35 because it had 35 keys on it. That's how it got its name. And this happens to not have a serial number on it because Bill Hewlett himself gave it to me. Now, the HP 35 was being designed and manufactured. Recall I mentioned when I met the team that was developing the 9100, I mentioned this person became a very close friend of mine by the name of Tom Whitney. Well, when he finished the 9100, Tom took a sabbatical, but when he came back, Bill Hewlett tagged him with the job of developing a product that was functionally the same as the 9100, but would fit in his shirt pocket. And so Tom Whitney got the job to design that product. And they would go to Bill's office and they would measure the size of his shirt pocket.
Figure out what a shirt pocket
figure out
was,
what size it was going to be to make sure the thing would fit in his shirt pocket. So at any rate, so now fast forward, I've now progressed the Data Systems Division. This is circa 1975. The Data Systems Division splits into three entities. The Data Systems Division, which was responsible for the 2100 series, AMD, which was responsible for measurement systems, and the General Systems Division, which was responsible for this ill-fated HP 3000 that was now becoming successful. And so Tom Whitney, who was working in another division called the Calculator Division, designing this handheld calculator. Hold that thought. So in the General Systems division, we, in 1975, take the HP 3000 that basically had, let's say nominally, $5 million in revenue. From 1975 to 1979, we built it into $1 billion business. One of the fastest growing business.
Back when $1 billion was really
when $1 billion was really $1 billion. One of the fastest growing businesses in all of the electronics industry. And I was the head of marketing for this product, working for a general manager by the name of Ed McCracken, who will continue on a little later. But at any rate, now back to the General Systems division and back to Tom Whitney. So Tom Whitney, after he does the HP 35, HP moves the development and manufacturing of the HP 35 to Corvallis, Oregon. And Tom Whitney didn't want to go to Corvallis, Oregon. So Tom comes over and becomes the head of engineering for the General Systems division, where I'm the head of marketing. Fast forward a year later, I should have mentioned, when Tom was engineering and developing the HP 35, he had a young engineering student working for him by the name of Steve Wozniak. Okay, so Tom now didn't want to go to Corvallis, Oregon, becomes the head of engineering at the General Systems division of Hewlett-Packard. This is circa 1978, something like that. And there's this little company in Cupertino that's becoming quite successful. So Tom gets a call from a guy by the name of Steve Jobs. And Steve says, I hear from Steve Wozniak that you're really a good engineering manager and we need engineering managers and we'd like you to come to work for us. Tom goes to work for Apple, 1978, thereabouts, as really their first engineering manager, responsible for the Apple II, the Apple III. Tom retires, I'm going to say 1982. And to finish the Tom Whitney story, unfortunately, Tom dies of cancer in 1987. Tragic. Very emotional for me, because he was a very close friend. Back to the General Systems division, 1979. Now it's becoming quite large. And it becomes a group of its own and splits into multiple divisions. The Computer Systems division has responsible for the HP 3000, and I get responsibility for the General Systems division, but it's given a new charter. The General Systems division is given a new charter because the General Systems division, which coincidentally had the same name as IBM's General Systems division, which was responsible for all of IBM's small computers, including the personal computer. So I was given the responsibility of starting HP's small computer business. And we started out with a product called the HP 250.
In what year was this?
This was 1980.
So before the IBM PC was introduced.
Before the IBM PC was introduced. And in 1980, in March of 1981, we introduced the HP 125, which was HP's first personal computer. And it emanated out of another division of HP's called the Data Terminal division. And it basically had a CRT display, a keyboard, and a box that had a microprocessor in it. And it ran something called CPM that was developed by a company called Digital Research in Monterey, California. So that got me into the personal computer business. And I was the general manager now of this division.
Before you get into that, can you explain briefly, what were the key you mentioned the General Systems Division had the 3,000, and you grew that to $1 billion business. What made it so successful? Was it just the right thing at the right time? Was it, what was the positioning, the marketing of it, the hardware, what made it so successful?
What made HP 3000 so successful? Well, the simple answer was I was a great marketing manager.
Right.
But
that's obviously one part of it.
Well, this was the era, this was 1970s, and I'm going to pick up on this theme again in a minute when we talk about 3Com, is 1960s was about mainframes. The 1970s was about mini computers, and I came up with a marketing concept called distributed data processing, in that these mini computers would be distributed to departments to complement the mainframe at headquarters. And so it was a classic example of pioneering a new market and developing a whole new concept, a new market. And so coming up with this marketing concept, distributed data processing, that was helpful. And we were also competing with DEC. And my boss's boss, Ed McCracken's boss, was a guy by the name of Paul Ely, who was fiercely competitive. And he would produce these charts on semi-log paper. And when you draw a line on semi-log paper, changes in slope indicate changes in growth rate. And so he would continuously plot the sales rate of the HP computers against DEC computers. And he was a phenomenal business manager. And he taught me a lot about Management 101 in terms of the basics of managing a business, in terms of making clear what the mission is, making clear what the objectives are, making clear what the strategy is, and codifying those things in writing so everybody was on board, so that then you could then have everybody contributing to common goals to get the job done. So we had a very effective and very productive management team with a great marketing program. And it also, at that time, it wasn't just the mini computer itself. We had developed a great software program called Image, which was the first data processing program for mini computers. The first database management program for mini computers. And it used sequential access methods. It didn't use the modern data. At that time, that was the only kind of method they had for database management systems. But it was a major, major hit in terms of the success of the HP 3000. And so great hardware, great software, great marketing, great sales. Then we began to we realized, well, you need to have peripherals to support this mini computer. The first thing we added was line printer. Then we started building our own disk drives and our own magnetic tapes. We opened a business unit in Boise called the Boise Division, which manufactured disk drives and tapes. And so, when you add it together, the HP 3000 originally sold for basically about $100,000. Now that you started populating it with all these peripherals, $200,000, $250,000. So it was a reasonably good size sale in selling them. So that was part of the success formula for the HP 3000.
Great product, right time.
Let's go back to the HP 125, HP's first personal computer. So as the head of that, as the general manager division, my challenge was figuring out how to get the attention of the sales force selling basically a 3,000, the HP 125 was priced, I think it was like $3,200 or something like that. And how do you get the attention of the sales force to sell a $3,000 desktop computer when they're selling $200,000 mini computers? And so I kept doing research, kept scratching my finger out, what can we do here? And this is now 1980. And something called Ethernet is beginning to percolate around the technical community. So I dig into this thing, Ethernet. Wow, if we could figure out a way to connect these computers, these personal computers together, we could sell maybe 10 at a time. And that would get it to at least a $30,000 sale. Maybe we could get the attention of our salespeople. So I started looking into this. So circa, I'm going to say November-ish, October, November-ish, 1980, a good friend of mine at that time named Gib Myers had worked at HP in manufacturing. We'd become friends. He had left HP to become a venture capitalist, and he joined a venture firm called the Mayfield Fund. And the Mayfield Fund had been founded by two people whose last name was Davis, Wally Davis and Tommy Davis. They weren't related at all, same last name by coincidence. Wally Davis, co-founder, and Gib Myers, who was their first apprentice, if you will. And Wally was at a conference, at a talk at Stanford, being given by a guy by the name of Bob Metcalfe. And Bob was given a talk about his interest in commercializing Ethernet as a product and building a company to commercialize Ethernet as a product. And that the way, and he was looking for venture capital, and he had become quite well known because he was the inventor of Ethernet. And his comment to the audience was, the way I'm going to decide whose money to take for venture capital is the venture firm that can introduce me to the best person to run the company, to become CEO of the company. So that stuck in Wally Davis's head, goes back to the office. He tells Gib Myers, Gib, I heard this guy talking about Metcalfe, talking about something called Ethernet, but he's looking, the way he's going to determine whose venture capital he takes is whoever can bring him the best person to run the company. Gib says, I got exactly the right person. I get a call from Gib. Gib says, hey, tells me the story about Wally meeting Bob at this conference. I'd like you to meet Bob Metcalfe. Terrific. Bob and I agreed to have lunch at Mac's Tea Room on Main Street in downtown Los Altos. I forget the date, but I'm going to say November 1980. And it was love at first sight. We just hit it off perfectly. We had a very common view of the world. We saw the world being divided into 3 millenniums. But our millenniums were in tens of years, not thousands of years, because technology made time go very fast. The first millennium was 1960 mainframes. The second millennium was mini computers, 1970s. And the 1980s was going to be the millennium of personal computers, and they were going to be networked. And ergo, we had this idea and this concept. And so Bob says, I'd like you to join the company and, actually become president of the company. And I was technically employee number 9, although there were only 5 employees. A couple had left. Bob Metcalfe, Ron Crane, Greg Shaw, Howard Charney, Al Lem, David Spiller. There were 6. So I was technically employee number 7. And terrific. I'm all excited. And so go home and tell my wife I've decided to accept the offer to join 3Com. And we would run in the morning, and so we're running in that morning. So we go out to run, and I'm just telling her, well, I'm going to leave HP and join 3Com. What do you think about that? And I turn over and look at her, tears coming down her eyes, and we're running by, it's another story, we're running by the house owned by a guy by the name of Jim Trybig, another story. But so we're running along, tears streaming down her face. What's the matter? She says, well, why don't you, going to work for a startup, they going to be successful? Are they going to make any money? And you're being successful at HP, you're general manager of the personal computer division. Why don't you stay at HP? Maybe you become president of HP. For sure you're going to become a vice president. Why do you want to leave HP? Oh, dear. So I called Bob back, and after, they goes, Bob, I told my wife about leaving HP to join you at 3Com. It didn't go very well. Do you mind if you and Howard Charney have dinner with my wife and I? Sure, terrific. So Bob, Howard, and I and my wife go to dinner. This is now December 1980. So after dinner, I asked her, well, what do you think? Wow. Well, Bob Metcalf's the most charismatic guy I've ever met. Howard Charney's the smartest guy I've ever met. If they'll have you, I'd go for it. And so, ergo, Bob, we passed the test. It's all good for a go. So now I have to resign from HP.
Was it difficult leaving Hewlett-Packard? Did Bill Hewlett and everybody come down on you and say you're doing something crazy or whatever?
It was. It was a challenge. The couple interesting parts to that. The first part was Paul Ely, whose name I'd mentioned before. He and I had become, he was sort of like a mentor, so I was a mentoree. And we had somehow or another got hooked up going sailing in the Caribbean, which he also did. So we became even close that way. And he had 2 sons, which I'll get to in a minute. But when I submitted my resignation to leave HP, Paul would not speak to me for 2 years. And I wound up recruiting his youngest son to be 3Com's first salesperson, and his oldest son, who developed the infamous IBM Ethernet PC card. But he wouldn't speak to me for 2 years. On the other hand, John Young, who was president at the time, wrote me this fabulous letter wishing me well. I ran into Bill Hewlett actually on an airplane. And Bill asked me, well, why did you leave HP? You had a great career here. You're doing great. And, I'm just curious. Is there something I could have done differently? And I said, well, Bill, the reason I left HP is because HP was your and Dave's company. And I wanted to have my own company. Because now I'm on to my second phase of my career, building a business.
Right. So I wanted to ask you about that. You said that was one of your early goals when you'd left the Army and were sort of setting out on a career. Being an entrepreneur or starting your own business was not what it is today. It wasn't sort of part of the common vernacular. It was still in the days when people were building big companies and going to work for big companies, and even at the folks that started Fairchild and Intel, that's not what they set out to do. It sort of got forced into it because there was no other path to do what they wanted. Was that just something you personally wanted to do, was build your own company, start your own company? Was that?
Yeah, so where did the itch come from that I needed to scratch? The itch wasn't well formed. So let me be clear about that. And building a business could have been building a clothing business, I don't know, or building a manufacturing business, or making widgets. It didn't become more clear about being an entrepreneur in technology until I got to Silicon Valley. When I got to HP and began to understand and learn about Fairchild, it was coming into being in that time, Intel shortly thereafter. And being at HP, we were suppliers selling computers to a lot of these companies. One of my biggest early customers was a company named Timeshare, making timeshare computing. Another one was a company called Measure. Oh, now you got me into it. Another one was called MeasureX, that made huge, big equipment that enabled companies to make paper. Dave Boston was the CEO there. And so as a result of me being a salesperson in 1968, selling computers to all these young companies was what exposed me to what the thrill and excitement was like of being an entrepreneur, having your own company. But, thank you for bringing that out. So let's go back to the story here that we're telling. We're now in the March timeframe. And so since I had agreed to join Bob now went back to his venture capitalists. And of course, he was obligated to take money from Mayfield because they'd put us together. But he had also been talking with another venture firm, two other venture firms, one of which was by the name of NEA, a person by the name of Dick Kramlich. And Dick had introduced him to another person by the name of Jack Melkor, who ran Melkor Venture Management and was actually an ex-HP person. And so Dick Kramlich and Gibb were privy to knowing that I was joining Bob at 3Com. But Jack couldn't know because Melkor Venture Management had as its investors John Young, Paul Ely, all these people that worked at HP. And so they couldn't. At any rate, so it all becomes public, and we get on in my first few days at 3Com. Our offices were at 3000 Sand Hill Road, Building 1. And
right in the venture, and at Mayfield's offices? Or?
No. It was 3000 Sand Hill Road, Building 1. Was a suite of offices that now that Bob knew he was going to get money, he had got Tom Ford to allow him to lease pending the coming of the venture capital. 30 or 60 days, 60 days maybe in advance of the venture capital. So that's where our offices were. So now let's go, this is going to be like April or so. So I'm getting my feet wet, we're getting going here. We've got to get the company going. And several stories here we can go with this, but this is going to be like April 81, something like that. And so Bob says, help me get a better understanding of, what we want Ethernet to look like. There's this application of Ethernet over at Stanford that I want to take you over and show it to you. Then you can meet the guy that sort of put it together. It's going to be a fun experience in learning how Ethernet can be used in different kinds of applications. Terrific. We go over to Stanford and we meet this guy, and he's got this setup with 2 microprocessors connected with a multi-bus controller running Ethernet over Ethernet, one running the front end and the other running the back end. Andy Bechtolsheim, Stanford University Network. Terrific. So Andy gives me the tour, tells me blah, 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 blah. Okay. So hold that thought on Andy. We'll come back to Andy in a little bit. the first product that we released was a product called UNet, Unix for networking. It was the first Unix version of Unix with TCP/IP protocols. And we get a call from this person in a company in Bellevue. I've heard about this thing called UNet, and we'd like to buy it. And I forgot what it was selling for, tens of thousands of dollars. Terrific, we'll be finished with it in a couple of weeks, and I'll bring up a tape, you can install it. So this is Greg Shaw's working on this, Greg Shaw himself. And by then, I think we'd had a person by the name of Jeff Mason, who actually came out of HP. We wrap up UNet, put it on the tape, get on the plane. I go up to Bellevue, and this company's office is located on the second floor of a suite of offices in sort of like a motel building, but it was a suite of offices. And so I go and knock on the door, and door opens. This teenager opens the door, what I thought was a teenager. I say, I'm here to see Paul Allen to deliver a magnetic tape for a product that he bought. Oh, sure, no problem, I'll get him. So Paul comes over, and Paul, I got the tape here, we'll install it and see if it works. Who was the teenager who answered the door? Oh, that's my partner, Bill Gates. It's the first time I met Bill. And so at any rate, we installed the UNet, and it winds up working fine. And so Microsoft becomes one of our early first customers. They used it.
What were they connecting with this?
What they were connecting, they had 3 VAXs that they wanted to connect together. And the VAXs had a bus called Unibus, and we had developed, they had developed a special product called Unibus Ethernet connection, and they had actually used our transceivers. And they wanted to connect these 3 VAXs together, if I can remember this right. One was used for the development, actual coding. The second one was used for compiling, and the third one was used for debugging. And they wanted to move the files back and forth to be able to do this in a very rapid fashion. And they were working on this project of which they couldn't tell me anything about. Of course, it was MS-DOS. And so that's what they wanted to use the product for, is connect these 3 VAXs to accelerate their development of MS-DOS.
I'm amazed that Microsoft had enough money to buy 3 VAXs. Those are hundreds of thousands of dollars at those times each.
I don't know where the money came from, but maybe IBM was front loading it. I don't know. I should have asked where the money came from. I never, the thought never, and thereby
just thinking back, they're really small and they're just doing this, and 3 VAXs, that's a huge investment at the time.
Yeah, and this is like I said, this is April of 1981, and there's probably like 10 people in the company, 12 people in the company.
I mean, at exactly the same time we were installing a VAX at VLSI Technology as the first startup, and that was $1 million. With all the peripherals and maximum size disk and stuff. And
I don't think that, maybe they were PDP-11s. They could have been PDP-11s. Yeah. I'll bet they were PDP-11s. I don't think they were VAXs. I think they were probably PDP-11s.
Okay, just my own sort of personal curiosity. Like, they get that money.
All right, so we're back to the scene. So now we got to build a company. And so coming out of HP and having run a division, I understood profit and loss and, manage a company and so forth. And I had 500 people working for me. And so we got to build the company. We got to add people. And we got to get these products going. We got to get the products engineered and being developed. And so we're adding people. And we're getting up to like 20 people, 25 people, something like that. And we finally get the transceiver done, and now we're having to manufacture them. Now we had to get a bigger building because Tom Ford said you can prototype things here, but you can't manufacture at 3000 Sand Hill Road. And we had contracted to move into a building, coincidentally, 1302 Shorebird Lane, which is one street up the street here from the Computer History Museum. And we were supposed to move in June of 1981. So we're getting orders for the transceivers. We were building them in this office secretly on building one, but now we have to start building them in somewhat kind of a volume. So we go to Tom and say, Tom, the building's not ready. We got to build these things. Is there some way you could help out? So Tom says, well, as long as you make it clear they're prototypes, what I'll do is I'll let you take over the locker room, because he had a locker room at 3000. They had 4 buildings there, and they had a locker room for people to go and change clothes and shower so they could go out and run during lunch or something. So you can take over the locker room. So, okay, so we take over the locker room. And now this is getting into June and July. It's hot. And so we got these fans blowing air into this hot place where we're making this transceiver. And the first person, our first manufacturing person, is a person by the name of Pam Vos. Let me digress and talk about Pam Vos. Incredible young woman. And she was with us for, I'm going to say 6 years maybe, 5 to 6 years, all in manufacturing. She became a first-level supervisor. She retires in 1987 at the age of 26, 27 maybe, to Vermont as a millionaire.
Good for her. Good for you.
Fabulous story. But anyway, so we're building transceivers. And we're developing something called the Unix for Ethernet. And we're developing something called Q-bus for Ethernet. And now we're starting to develop multi-bus for Ethernet. So we got all these cards that you could plug into the various buses of these various computers, mini computers and smaller computers. And that's going pretty well. But it's taken a while for these things to start selling. And we've got all these people hired, and all of a sudden we're starting to, we're going to run out of money here. One of the things that I didn't learn at HP, of all the things I learned in terms of management processes and management techniques, because running a division at HP, you never had to worry about cash, because cash came from corporate headquarters. And so you never really had to worry about cash and cash flow. So I was now getting a firsthand lesson in cash flow. And so as a result, we put in place my first call to order here, 4-month survival plan. And I wrote this thing out on 2 pages. I actually have it here with me, but you don't need to see it. But 2-page, 4-month survival plan, where we were very explicit in outlining assignments and responsibilities to each of the key people in the company to make sure that they were getting their projects done on time. Get the Unibus Ethernet out, get the Q-bus out, get our sales going. And we had recruited a salespeople. We were selling through distributors, get the distributors selling. So we were really working hard to get this thing going. And sure enough, we got it going to at least keep the cash flow going. And so now we get to October, November.
Of what year?
Of 1981. And we're raising our second round of funding. The first round of funding was $1 million for 33% of the company. We raised $1 million for 33% of the company. So we're raising the second round, and we were going to raise $2 million for the second round. And so we, of course, Mayfield and NEA and Melcor were all going to put in, but they had to have somebody, a third party come in.
Set the price.
To set the price. And so we had 2 new companies that were going to set the price. One was a company called Sequoia, and the other was a venture capital firm called Venrock. So Sequoia was going to lead the second round. And our other venture capitalists, Mayfield, NEA, and Melcor, were going to follow. Don, person by the name of Don Valentine, who was the head of Sequoia, was the lead to lead the round at Sequoia. So now we're getting into December. We're going through all the details of the paperwork and all the, getting all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And so Don calls up Bob Metcalf and says, Bob, I don't think, we were targeting to close the deal by the end of the year. Bob, I don't think we're going to be able to close the deal by the end of the year. Bob's, why is that? Don says to Bob, you own too much stock. What? You own too much stock. You have too much ownership of the company. Well, what do you want me to do? You should sell some of your shares. We want you to sell some of your shares. Oh, I see. Bob says, you want me to sell some of my shares? And I suppose you want me to sell them to you. Don says, yes, we'd like to buy them. And Bob says, okay, but let me just be clear, Don. The issue is I have too many shares. Is that right? Yes, that's right. Okay, I'll solve that problem. Bob, we used to have these weekly all-hands meetings at the company at 1302 Shorebird Lane. And so at the weekly all-hands meeting, Bob says, in order to make sure we close our financing, I have to sell some of my stock. And I want to sell it to you, the employees. And I'm going to sell it to you for $1 a share. And so Bob, I forget how many shares it was, a lot. Bob sold roughly 25% of his stock to the employees. Bob owned at that time, I think, close to 19%, something like that. So 4% of the company at that time to employees. And at any rate, so then he goes back to Don. I said,
was that the price of the round?
No, this was the price of the then common shares, because the preferreds were higher. I think the price of the preferreds were $3, and the price of the round was going to be at $6. So, okay, so Bob goes back to Don. Don, I've solved the problem, sold the shares. So we're ready to close. I said, well, what did you do with the shares? I sold them to employees. So let's close the deal. So we closed the deal, and as a result, actually, I wound up buying shares from my mother, my brother, and my sister, and I bought more shares for myself, which got me to 9% of the company at that time. So we closed the deal, $2 million, and it was $2 million at an $8 million valuation, 25% of the company. So now we've got enough money to keep going. And now the company's really starting to percolate. And I should have mentioned, to go back a minute, August of 1981 was a seminal event, the introduction of the IBM PC. And Bob and I, for whatever reason, both got invited to the introduction of the IBM PC held in Dallas. And the general manager, Don Estridge. We met Don, and of course he died in a plane accident. But at any rate, so IBM PC. We got to figure out how to get Ethernet connected to this IBM PC because it's going to make a big difference. Oh, I need to digress again. So this is the summer of 1981. I get a call. Hi, Bill Krause. Bill. Andy Bechtelsheim. Andy, how are you? Great to hear from you. What's up? Well, Bill, now that you and Bob have teamed up and you seem to got 3Com going, I want to promote and commercialize son, Stanford University Network. And I've decided I want to team up with you guys to commercialize Stanford University Network. That's interesting. Come over and talk to us. So he comes over and chat and so forth and so on. We listen. Of course, he was talking about building a workstation based on Unix, microprocessors, multibus interface, using our multibus Ethernet interface. But it was Unix-based. And, oh no, this was like September or October of 81, sorry. Because the IBM PC had been introduced. And so, Andy, we're going to be focusing on Office and IBM PCs, personal computers. You're going to be focused on Unix and engineering. We don't think it's a good mix. It'll just distract us, and we won't be able to give full attention to what you want to do. But we happen to know, Greg Shaw knows a guy over at Berkeley by the name of Bill Joy. He's a really good software guy. You ought to go meet up Bill Joy. And so we connected Andy and Bill Joy, and henceforth, son got born and became our largest customer buying multibus Ethernet controllers, which helped us get through 1982, while we're now trying to figure out how to build an Ethernet controller for the IBM PC. Okay, now, back to that story. So Bob was becoming well known for what has now become known as Metcalfe's Law. Bob was an incredible spokesperson. He is probably the best communicator I've ever met. I learned more about communication from Bob than anyone else I could have learned from. He was unbelievable. So Bob had developed this notion that it was important to connect computers that could communicate, because just like the telephone, the value of a connection wasn't linear, it was exponential. It went up exponentially. And so therefore, the number of connections went up in value as the square of the number of connections. Ergo, Metcalfe's Law. Okay, Bob, we got it. We've got to have lots of connections. But the Unibus Ethernet card is 13 by 13. That's 169 square inches of circuit board space. Plus, we got 16 square inches for the transceiver components. So that's 173 square inches of circuit board that we got to fit into the plug-in slot of an IBM PC, which is 5 by 13 or 65 square inches. How are we going to do that? So, again, doing some thinking, a couple of days later, I come back, Bob, there's this thing called Moore's Law. I'm going to show you. And I drew this curve. I said, Bob, your job as head of engineering is to figure out how to get from $4,000 a connection down to $1,000 per connection. Because if you're going to have IBM PCs selling for $2,500, maybe people will be willing to connect them for $1,000. So you got to figure out. So this was an exponential declining curve going from 4,000 to 1,000. And I said, where'd you come up with that? I said, well, it's just Moore's Law. We need to figure it out. Okay, now, another coincidence. This has to be probably November, December 1981. I go to a lunch. And, oh man, I'm going to forget his name. Person who spun out of Intel to start a company called Seek.
Yeah. Gordy Campbell?
Gordy Campbell and I sit next to each other at lunch. What do you do? Well, 3Com, we make Ethernet controllers, and we're trying to figure out how to develop one for the IBM PC, and what do you do? Oh, we make integrated circuits. Oh, that's interesting. Why don't we do an LSI chip for Ethernet? You can take all that stuff and you can be able to shrink it down. Okay, that sounds like a great idea. So we form a partnership. And I'm going to try another. So the partnership is, we'll do the analog part, you do the digital part. So Ron Crane partners up with Dotto Bonato, who was the circuit designer at Seek that was responsible for developing this VLSI circuit. Okay. Fast forward a couple months later, board meeting, and Don Valentine would alternate with his partner, Pierre Lemon, at various meetings. So Pierre happened to be at this meeting, and we're talking about this partnership with Seek developing this VLSI circuit, which was critical to our being able to get the IBM Ethernet controller going. And so Pierre says, well, I'd like to meet those guys. Would you take me down and introduce them to them? Sure, Pierre, I'd be happy to. We'll take you down. So we arrange a meeting, set it up, and so we go down to the meeting. And so here's Dotto Bonato with a great big schematic diagram of the VLSI circuit up on the wall, and he's going through the circuit. And Pierre's in the audience. He's going through the circuit, and Pierre raises his hand and says, excuse me, Dotto, chip's not going to work. Oh, excuse me. Pierre Lemon was one of the co-founders of National Semiconductor, PhD in semiconductors. Okay. So Pierre says to Dotto, chip's not going to work. Pierre looks at this old man with gray hair. What's he talking about? So, Pierre, so let me show you. See here? This is an AND gate. It really should be an OR gate. Dotto looks at it. Holy Toledo, he's right. At any rate, so that's one of my Pierre Lemon stories. Ergo, the chip gets developed. We get it, we get everything put together. We get the board put together. And now, the next thing we needed to do was Ethernet was being connected by this big, thick yellow cable, and it connected to a device called a transceiver that you screwed it on with connectors, and the transceiver had a cable that came out of it and connected to the computer, to a controller, to the digital part in the computer. The transceiver was sort of an analog to digital converter, and it took analog signals off this big, thick yellow cable, transferred them into digital, and ran it up this cable to the controller in the computer. Okay. Well, that's not going to work with this big, thick yellow cable, and plus the fact that Ron Crane worked his magic, and now we got the transceiver on the card. Why don't we use something called scope cable? Nice little thin wire. It's easy, it's easy to maneuver around. You can string it around, and 50 ohm scope wire. So Ron, figure out how transceiver can drive 50 ohm scope cable. Ron Crane figures it out. Oh, Ron Crane, by the way, was one of the employees at employee number 2 at 3Com. So Ron figures it out. So, all right, now we're getting to the point we need some software to develop. So by now we've added a software team. A person by the name of Larry Bierbaum came from HP. He's running our engineering department now. And there was a software team, Greg Shaw, Jeff Mason, Lynn Welge, and one other, developing something called the Ether series. So now we had some software that allowed us to transfer files, transfer information to a printer, I'll come back to that in a minute, and transfer files back and forth from the disk. So we're all excited about this. So let's hook up 2 computers. We can show that they worked. Why don't we call our friend at Apple, Steve Jobs? Have Steve come over and show him. This is really cool. So, okay, we set up the demo, 2 PCs, connect it with the plugged-in cards, 50 ohm scope cable, software running. So we call Steve. Steve, why don't you come over? We got this really cool thing we want to show you. Sure, I'll come over after work, and when we're finished, we go to Frankie and Johnny Luigi's, have pizza and some wine, we'll hang out. Steve comes over, 5 o'clock, 5:30. go through the demo. Classic Steve. Pardon my language. Who's the brain dead asshole that came up with this shit? This is Drek. You got this stupid connector here, like a BNC connector, like you connect to TVs. If you want to make it simple to connect, why don't you just plug it into the telephone jack? One of the unknown notions, Steve Jobs responsible for the Ethernet as we now know it, that plugs in to the telephone jack.
I was wondering when that transition happened, or how that transition happened.
That's how it happened. So, wow. Steve's right. We need to figure out how to plug this thing into the telephone jack and make switches to connect it. So, Ron, we need to figure out how to get the transceiver to run over a twisted pair of wires so we can plug it into a telephone jack. And in the meantime, let's get our engineers working on switches so that we can switch it together and make it all work.
Yeah, so I mean, the losses and noise on the twisted pair is going to be a lot higher, right?
So
he had to figure all that out. So at any rate, fast forward, he figures it all out, and then become the birth of the Ethernet, as we now know it today. So let's progress forward here. 3Com. Let's go to. Let's go to 1984. So now we've gotten to the point where, let me back up from that. Following my lessons learned at HP, I had developed, and I actually happen to have a copy of it here. You won't be able to see it through the thing, probably not. But it was our first 5-year business plan written on one sheet of paper. And more digression. So by this time, it's 1981, and a good friend of mine, I mentioned his name before, Jim Tribeck, had left HP in 1978, started a company called Tandem Computers. Tandem Computers has been very successful, actually probably 1977, something like that. And he had developed a 5-year business plan, of which I'd gotten a copy of. In the way, what venture capitalists wanted you to do, they wanted you to be able to create a company that within 5 years would achieve $50 million in revenue. And so Jim had developed a business plan that showed Tandem going from $0 to $50 million in 5 years. And sure enough, he achieved it. So I happened to be at a social event with Jim, and I said, Jim, and this was like just as I'm joining 3Com, how did you do this? How did you go through this thing of, being able to develop a business plan when I had no clue of what's going to happen in 2, 3, and 4? And he said, well, it was pretty simple. No, let me do it in Jimmy language. Jimmy was from Houston. He said, well, Bill, it was simple. It was easier for me when I developed this plan. It was easy for me to do what I needed to do to get back on plan rather than writing a new plan. So I just worked on getting back on plan rather than writing a new plan, because writing a new plan was too hard for me. So, okay. So ergo, I wrote the first 5-year plan. One-page plan.
And so just to recall the numbers, it had us doing, you won't remember this, but I'll read them off. So our fiscal year for 3Com went from June to May. So June of 1981, to May of 1982 was really sort of our first real year with venture capital.
This is a very Hewlett-Packard division. No, people don't normally divide.
Well, yeah, their fiscal year was different, offset from regular calendar year. But
yeah, exactly. They end in October, right? End of October.
That's right. Their fiscal year ended in October.
I spent some time thinking about this, about
what to do the fiscal year for
what
the other
to make
side
the fiscal year, and the fact that everybody fiscal year ends at the end of December, and so there's always chaos at
the end of the fiscal year.
And so I debated a long time what to make the fiscal year.
Well,
so I remembered that NHP was one of my models of, well, they got away with it.
Well, the fiscal year started in June.
June 1st, not June
1st.
Yeah.
The reason is that Bob, when he left Xerox, he was trying to figure out how to commercialize Ethernet. And what he was doing was he was consulting, mainly doing consulting. And he went, this is a digression, he went on a visit to visit DEC. And God, I can see his face and everything. The head of engineering at DEC,
Gordon Bell.
Gordon Bell, thank you. Gordon Bell. And so he's in this meeting.
Founder of this museum.
Founder of the Computers Museum. So Gordon is saying, look, Bob, here's the problem I need to solve. I got these computers, and I need to have them communicate. And I need to be able to have them communicate compatibly. And Bob wrote computer communication compatibility. And he drew a line through the first syllable, com, 3com. I have to think about that. Several months later, he calls up his fraternity brother friend, Howard Charney. I'd like to incorporate. How about seeing if I can incorporate a company with the name 3com? One of the things I like about it being 3com is since 3, when you do alphabetical sorts, numbers come at the first of the alphabet. So we'll always be listed first in the telephone directory. So anyway, so 3com name gets born, and so he puts the fiscal year in June to have it be born. So, okay, back to our business plan. So our business plan says we're going to do $3.9 million at the end of May 1982. And in 1983, we're going to do $12 million, 84, $25 million, and 85, right on target, we're going to do $50 million. Okay, let's go back to review the actuals. Rather than rewriting the plan, we have to get back on plan, my lesson from Jim Trybig. So in 1982, we did 1.8 million versus 3.9. We're really off plan. 1983, we're supposed to do 12 million. We do 4.8 million. We're getting better, but we're still way off plan. 84, we're supposed to do 25, but we do 16.8. I'll come back to that because that's the year we went public. 1985, we're supposed to do 50, 46.3. Not bad.
Back on plan.
Not bad. Back on plan. Okay, so we go public in 1984. That's an interesting story there. We go public with Morgan Stanley and Roberts Coleman Stevens. Sandy Roberts and Roberts Coleman Stevens. And Morgan Stanley, this is just as Frank Quattrone is coming on the scene at Morgan Stanley. They were the lead fund to take us public. And so we're doing our roadshow. They initially said, well, we'll take you public at $12 a share. This is 1984. And we go on the roadshow. I should back up. So going on the roadshow, we had recruited this fabulous chief financial officer. John Shelley was his name. So John Shelley calls up Morgan Stanley and says, well, who pays for the expenses of the roadshow? And Morgan Stanley says, well, everybody pays for their own way. And so, okay, we'll be flying coach. Pause. Of course, the investment bankers always flew first class. So anyway, so we start to go on the roadshow, and we're in coach. Morgan Stanley folks are in first class. Robertson Coleman, who was the other investment banker who's taking us public, they had a person that worked for Sandy by the name of Paul Stevens, Robertson Coleman Stevens. And so Paul was the third partner. Paul Stevens flew coach all the way with us. Sat right there in coach with us all the way. Paul Stevens, to this day, is a very good friend of mine. Okay, so now we're going to go public, go on the road show, $12 a share. But 1984 is a very difficult year economically. And there was kind of a little bit of a recession in 1984. So we're having trouble getting people to buy into this thing. And so Morgan says, no, we're going to have to make the price $10 a share. Well, okay, we keep going. Then they say, we're going to have to make it $8 a share. Grumble. We keep going, and it gets down to the day we're going to go public. And so I'm at Morgan Stanley's offices in New York. Bob being Bob, he's at the IBM PC headquarters in Boca Raton on a sales call. We're trying to make money here. And so the guy who's responsible for pricing the public offering, whose name I'm drawing a block on, smokes a big cigar, and Garancic was his last name. I forget his first. Max Garancic was his first. Max Garancic. He was the guy responsible for pricing the smokes big cigars. Look, guys, this is a small offering. It's $6 a share. Don't waste any more of my time. If you want to go public, just tell me yes or no now. You got a minute to decide.
Roadshow and everything.
1 minute. Tick, 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 tick. Yes or no. So I didn't have time to do it. So, okay, we'll do it. $6 a share. So I had to call Bob and apologize. It's only $6 a share. Fast forward, 12 months later, $6 a share is now $28 a share. So it worked out. It worked out just fine. So now we're public. We're growing the company, building the company. Seems to be going well. One of the things that I was very proud of was the culture that we built at the company. And the culture was built around a concept that I created called confederated entrepreneurship. Coming out of Hewlett-Packard, HP had the HP way. That was sort of the basis of their culture. And the basis of our culture was going to be confederated entrepreneurship. Because I felt that everybody wanted to be an entrepreneur, like us. And so the notion was, in building a company, what confederated entrepreneurship meant was the confederated part was you had to make clear a common set of goals, a common set of shared goals. And those shared goals would be very clearly communicated. Everybody would understand them. And then the actions to achieve those goals would be developed to every individual who owned their own business of being an entrepreneur, of determining what their work was, what their work plan was, and what their plan of action was to achieve their goals, to contribute to the achievement of the overall company goals, ergo confederated entrepreneurship. And so we had 4 company objectives that withstood the test of time and lasted for almost the whole time the whole time I was CEO. The first was customer satisfaction, second to none. Nothing else mattered. Second was develop products only when we can make a unique contribution for our customers. Third, build a quality organization based on confederated entrepreneurship. And fourth, manage for financial success by making a profit. So those were the 4 goals that we had that withstood the test of time and stood in place. And then we developed a management process called MOST, M-O-S-T, mission, objectives, strategy, and tactics. And our mission was simple. Lead in the development of personal computer networking products to enable customers to save money. And our first economic value proposition was based around the notion of being able to share, connect personal computers together, and enable them to connect to a printer to be able to share the printer. I should insert here, one of the key developments that helped the company be successful was the development of something called the laser printer. Oh, by the way, I should go back to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was developing a laser printer. And the laser printer was selling for $5,000 to $6,000. But we got this $2,000, $2,500 computer. You got this $5,000. You're not going to connect it, one-to-one. What if we could figure out, develop an Ethernet controller for the laser printer, and then we could connect the laser printer to the Ethernet network and connect networks of PCs to share the printer and get the economic benefit of cost sharing from the laser printer. And so that was sort of our economic value prop, was buy Ethernet, connect your personal computers and connect them to a laser printer, and get the benefit of sharing. And you can pay for the $1,000 cost of the card by sharing the cost of the printer. And so that became the economic value proposition as an example of developing products that had a unique contribution that enabled our customers to save money. So now we've got this management process, mission, objectives, strategy, and tactics. And every year we would put together our business plan and go through that plan. And people that worked at the company would sort of probably refer to me as somewhat anal about this. We had another concept called management by, so a lot of people had management by objectives. At 3Com, we had management by priorities. Again, going back to Confederated Entrepreneurship, everybody had to create a set of priorities of the things that they were going to work on and get done in a specific period of time so that we could get the plan accomplished. And we would start out with a 12-month plan. We would break that down into 3-month quarterly plans. And so each quarter we had a quarterly plan, and we'd break that quarterly plan down into monthly plans, and each quarter we had 3 monthly plans. And so every month, everybody would create a set of priorities of things they were going to get done for that month that would contribute to the goals we needed to achieve for that quarter. And then we'd get things done that quarter that we needed to achieve for the succeeding quarter to get things. And that's how we managed to stay on plan rather than rewriting the plan. But so back to the notion of this management priorities. So I had another concept that I borrowed from Andy Grove, and that was one-on-ones, management by one-on-ones. And so every week I'd have a one-on-one with the people who reported to me. And again, going back to the principles I'd learned when I joined the Army of the organization being upside down, my job was to create the environment and do everything I could to help my direct reports be successful. So I'd have these one-on-ones. The purpose was to review their monthly priorities, see how they were doing, what could I do to help them if they needed any help, or was there something I needed to do to help them with cross-functional connections? In other words, if they were stuck with somebody, weren't able to get the right help from somebody they needed, then my job was to facilitate that and enable them to be able to work across functional boundaries. So that was sort of my management process, management by priorities and making sure that everybody stayed on task. And so it turned out to be pretty effective.
So you got to the $50 million level in 84, 85?
85, and I've lose track of the numbers. 86, we targeted 80 million, did 84. 87, we did 110. So we're getting to be a pretty big company. But I want to go back to another interesting part of being a young company entrepreneur. And this would be, I'm going to say 1983, early 83. And I had this principle that I would not recruit people from HP unless they had already agreed they were going to resign, and that they had to initiate the action of reaching out to me. And if they were accepted, they were going to resign. It wasn't sort of a negotiation. I wasn't recruiting them. They were interested in joining the company. And I'd mentioned Larry Beerbaum, Jeff Mason. These were all people that had worked with me at HP. Same thing. They called me and asked if they could join. Okay, so now this is early 1983. I get a call. Hi, I'm Deborah Engel. Hi, I'm Deborah Engel, the head of HR at a division at Hewlett-Packard. And I've decided I want to join your company and become the head of HR at your company. Oh, that's nice. Well, okay, let's meet. So I meet with Deborah, and it was clear she was an awesome leader. And we had a couple of meetings. So, okay. Let me just check in with my partners. So I go to Bob and Howard and said, hey, I want us to recruit this person, Deborah Engel, to be head of HR. Pause. What the frick are you thinking? You want to hire an HR person? For the cost of the HR person, we could hire 2 engineers, we could hire another salesperson? What are you, out of your mind? You want to hire an HR person? What do we need an HR person for? Guys, trust me, I think it's going to work out. They met Deborah, and so we recruit Deborah. Deborah, fast forward, she's the godmother of all HR executives in Silicon Valley. She's infamous. She went on to lead not only our HR organization, but the IT organization and the facilities organization. The connection there was back to creating the environment for success. If you wanted to have an environment for success, okay, you had to have an HR organization that made sure people were being developed, compensated appropriately. And in order to help them be successful, they had to have an environment, i.e. facilities. And in order to make them productive, they had to have tools, automation tools, computers and software. So that was the logic of combining HR, facilities, and IT, which Deborah then ran, incredibly successful. So, so now we're getting close to 1989. And I should have mentioned earlier, there is another acronym called BHAG, Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. So in 1982, when we released the IBM Ethernet controller, I say, it's 1982. I said, okay, guys, we're going to do a BHAG. We're going to set a goal that we're going to Ethernet 1 million PCs before the end of this decade. Sort of a takeoff on John Kennedy's, who was one of my people that I admired in my youth. His takeoff on his, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of this decade. We're going to Ethernet 1 million PCs by the end of this decade. Okay. Fast forward, January 1989, 1,150,000 PCs have been connected. So
a whole year ahead of time, huh?
Almost a year ahead of time. And so now we get into when Bob and I and Howard first joined up, we had two major goals in mind, or two major concepts. One was we wanted to create a company that would stand the test of time. And the second was that we wanted to create an organization whereby that it would have developed enough to where we could all retire at the end of 10 years. Because my experience, and Bob's as well, looking around Silicon Valley at that time, the lifespan of the average senior executive or CEO was about 10 years because of the dramatic changes in technology. And so we felt that if we were successful in building a great company, that we could all retire and turn it over to the next generation of leaders in 10 years. So 1989, we're starting to, it's getting a couple more years here to 10 years, so we're getting close here. We've got to figure out succession plans and things about that. So we're beginning to think about the succession plans and figuring out how we're going to do that. And so fast forward to the notion that board doesn't think that, for whatever reasons, that Bob would be the right person to succeed me. And Bob, being as great as he was, accepted that. So we had to look for another successor. And I had, one of our board members was Jack Melkor Venture Management. One of the companies that Jack had funded before 3Com was a company called Rome, ROLM. And Rome was named based on the initials of the last name of the four founders, Richardson, Oshman, Leventhal, and Maxfield. Ken Oshman was the CEO of Rome, very successful, very well-known CEO. And I'd gotten to know Ken a little bit. And so I thought, well, let's see if we can get Ken to be my successor. And so I had some meetings with Ken, and he was excited about doing it. So Ken was going to be my successor. This is a little-known story. I don't know. I guess enough time's passed that we can make this public. So all set. Ken's going to be my successor. Press release all set. Announcements to be made. And this is like, I'm going to say...
And he was no longer at Rome?
Pardon? No, he's retired from... Rome was acquired by IBM.
Yep.
And so Ken said, thank you very much. I'm not going to work for IBM. And so he went on to become a private investor. And he actually became CEO of a company called Echelon.
Oh, yeah, I know that.
With Mike Markla. And so, okay. And this is now 1990. And so we're going to make this announcement, have a board meeting. I'm in my desk, board meeting's about to start, phone rings. And Ken's supposed to be on his way. Bill, Ken, what's up, Ken? Are you on the way? No. What's up? Can't do it. What do you mean you can't do it? I can't leave Echelon. It would be not the right thing to do. This is classic Ken Oshman. He was not going to leave this startup that he was responsible for with Mike Markla. He wasn't going to leave that just to become another big shot joining another big company. Can't do it. Oops. Board meeting starts. Guys, got some bad news. Ken doesn't want to do it. We got to go back to square zero. Fast forward, we go through some process. Eric Benamou winds up becoming my successor, and I become executive chairman and then retire some 1993. 12 years later, 2 years longer than what I was supposed to, which now begins. So first phase, learn about business. Second phase, build a business. Third phase, give back. So now I'm going to have to start my third phase of how do I go about giving back? And that phase is fortunately lasted more than 15 years. And every day I wake up excited to create a new chapter. And the basis of giving back is two ways. Giving back through my time by helping other entrepreneurs achieve their aspirations and ambitions. And secondly, by contributing philanthropically to important causes. Let me just touch on that first. Philanthropically, my wife and I chose to focus on education. Our reason for that was we felt that an educated young generation next society was essential to a number of different things, one of which we felt that a well-educated young generation was essential to continuing the country as a democratic society and a free nation and private enterprise. Second, well-educated people, you'd have next generation have a much better chance for peace around the world. Thirdly, if you had well-educated next generation, selfishly, it would help to fund my Social Security. So for a bunch of reasons, we focused on education as our targets for philanthropy. And there are three main areas. One is Penn State, where my wife got her undergraduate degree from the School of Education. Second is the Citadel, where I graduated from. And the third is a program that she started, which I'll come back to. But we're the largest donor to the College of Education at Penn State. Number of programs there, encouraging educators to go on and become teachers. And we go there once or twice a year to speak to the students. At the Citadel, as I mentioned, we're among the top three donors there. I've been on the foundation board. There's a lot of story there I won't bore you with, but I've been on their foundation board since the year 2000, so 24 some odd years. They have 8-year, you serve 4-year terms. You can serve 2 consecutive terms. That's 8 years, and then you have to get off for a year. So serve 8 years, get off a year, get back on for 8 years. I was chairman of the foundation 2002 or 3, something like that. But at any rate, so I go to the Citadel 2 to 3 times a year. And we're now in the process of funding a school of leadership and ethics. Turns out, I don't know that I've done some research. I don't know that there are any other schools of leadership. There are a number of leadership efforts, leadership departments, leadership initiatives, and things of that nature. The idea came out of 2 sources. One source was, it's actually in the year 2000. The president of Citadel came to visit me. And he was musing about the fact we're entering the 21st century. What would be a good vision for the Citadel to have as we enter the 21st century? And so he was thinking about that. And during the year 2000s, we had really serious deficiencies in the business world with fraudulent behaviors, Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, all this fraudulent behavior by the leadership. And so we got to thinking, well, let's see, the Citadel is all about leadership. What about combining leadership and ethics? And why don't we make the vision for the Citadel to lead in the education and development of principled leaders? And then that became the vision for the Citadel, which it still is. And from that, ergo, got born the Krause Center for Leadership and Ethics, which got things kick-started on raising the question, okay, if we're going to be a leader in the education development of principal leaders, what's the curriculum? What kind of curriculum should we have that would help the college do that? And so the Center for Leadership and Ethics was tasked with the challenge of developing certain curriculum, of which they did. There were certain specific classes that you had to take for credit, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior years. Fast forward now to a year or so ago, which is what we've graduated the Center for Leadership and Ethics into now funding the construction of a full school of leadership and ethics. So that's a little bit about the Citadel and the philanthropy there. Going back to my wife's philanthropy program, principal program, is it's what's called the Krause Center for Innovation at Foothill College. You can't see
that
it
on your shirt. Yep.
but it's on my shirt. You probably can't see it, but it's on my shirt. As I mentioned at the beginning of this long monologue, is my wife was an educator. She became a lifelong educator. She was a teacher elementary school teacher. And because she'd gotten a graduate degree in counseling and psychometry, she then went from being a teacher to being a counselor, and then an assistant principal, and then a principal in a middle school, Graham Middle School in Mountain View. And this was during the 1990s. And so we've been fortunate to have had some success in our business career. And I funded a computer lab at her middle school. And she had several epiphanies. First epiphany was the students loved it. They just loved being able to go to the computer lab and play with personal computers. The other epiphany was the teachers were technophobes. They had no clue, didn't know what to do. And having been a principal for a number of years, 10 years, she had observed there really was not very good professional development for teachers. So when she retired, she got connected with the president of Foothill, and they had an empty building, used to be the astronomy building at Foothill College. It was in disrepair, and she said, well, why don't we do something with this building? And my wife said, yeah, so we'll create a center for innovation based around the mission. She had adopted some of my management practices around the mission of educating educators on how to better use technology and new pedagogy to improve student outcomes. And ergo got born the Krause Center for Innovation, and we funded the renovation of this building. And together with our funding, and she's now every year raises $1 million or so from other people funding it. Bill Davidow, Dave House from Intel, Jim Morgan, people well-known, Scott McNeely, a lot of well-known people in Silicon Valley have been very generous in sort of funding this program, which is now going to be celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. So that's the philanthropy part.
Can I ask you about that? So back when teaching teachers about computers and all was, a fundamental step. What are you doing about AI in teaching?
Doug, thank you for asking. So since my wife's program has been in effect for 25 years, the technology that it's been focused on is obviously evolved dramatically over that 25 years, starting with personal computers, and then with, I can't pull that out of my pocket, but iPhones. Just to digress on that for a minute, when iPhones first came out, educators were paranoid. What are we going to do? Students are going to come to school with these things in their pocket. They're going to cheat. They're going to look everything up on this thing and they're going to cheat. Get over it. You got to figure out how to educate your students on how to effectively use this device to be able to improve their learning experience. iPhones. Let's see. Maker's Lab. Makerspace. These are printers, digital printers that make stuff
3D
out.
printers.
Pardon? 3D printers, thank you. 3D printers. So learning about 3D printers and what you can do with 3D printers. And the learning experience out of putting together this makerspace for 3D printers and laser printers, laser cutters, the experience was it became like home ec for women, for young female students. Young female students paranoid about math and computer science. Bring them to the makerspace and have them take a program, put it into the computer, and produce a file that you run on the 3D printer, and then take that and carve it up with a laser cutter, and then create something out of that. Made them completely comfortable with learning about math and computer science. It was amazing to me to go to when the makerspace first opened and see all the young female students in there thriving. Of course, male students do as well. But at any rate, Now, what's the new big thing? Artificial intelligence. So she's kicking off this year a program to focus on educating educators on how to utilize artificial intelligence with their curriculum and new pedagogy, and educating their students on how to effectively utilize artificial intelligence in a way that is appropriate without cheating. All the students that are going to school today, from grades 4 on up, well, yeah, they're all going to graduate, and artificial intelligence is going to be critical and essential to their working life. And so they need to figure out how to use it, and they need to figure out how to use it in a way that is ethical and moral without being viewed as cheating. And so this is a program she's kicking off this year, kicking off a fundraising program to fund it. She's talking with Apple and Google, Facebook, all the large companies, and hopefully we'll get some support from them in kicking that off. So, but thank you for raising the point about that's her new big program that she's raising, is to kick off this artificial intelligence education program for teachers. That'll be kicking off this March, I think, with the first kickoff. So just continue on that. One of our staff members is developed curriculum for the courseware that has been submitted to the state of California to be improved as an authorized credit for the teachers, because when teachers get credits, it increases their salary range. So, all right, so back to my giving of time to help entrepreneurs achieve their ambitions and aspirations. The sort of been cut to the chase in terms of interest of time. So since I've retired, I've served on 16 public boards, from Adobe to Sybase, and 20 other private companies, all with the notion of trying to help those entrepreneurs achieve their ambitions and aspirations. And every one of them has been a great learning experience. And I'm glad that I've been able to be of some degree of help, even at this age of 82, since you know I was born in 1942. Even at this age of 82, I still serve on a public board, a company called CommScope. I serve on 3 private boards, a company called Arctera, which is a spin-out from a company called Veritas. I serve on the board of a company called Ford Networks. I'll come back to that. And I serve on the board of a company called SmartCar. So to talk about more of the private companies, Ford Networks is the one I'm most proud. Well, it's like all of my children. I'm excited about all of them. But Ford Networks was founded by 4 PhD students out of Nick McEwen's lab at Stanford, Nick McEwen's computer science lab. Nick McEwen became well known as sort of the founder of software-defined networking. And these 4 students developed an algorithm that would allow you to create a model of your complete network in software, and then be able to manipulate the model to determine what happens to your network before you actually do it, thereby dramatically lowering outages and disruptions, also dramatically enabling better cybersecurity, because they can model who's authorized to enter the network, to get into the network. And the company was formed in 2014, 4 founders. David Erickson is the CEO. I won't get all their names right. Brandon Heller is the CTO. Payman, Payman is key architect, and Nikhil is responsible for developing a completely new platform that will use artificial intelligence to eventually be able to automatically run your network, to run the network autonomously. Now, to me, one of the most exciting aspects about this company, 4 founders, 2014, here it is, 11 years later. All 4 founders are still actively engaged, productively doing great work, making a contribution to improve society. It's just phenomenal. David Erickson is an incredible CEO, built a great company. Someday it'll go public and more people will know about it. Smart Car is another interesting story, founded by 2 brothers who happened to be the sons. Their father worked at Silicon Graphics and founded his own company. And I got to know him through a series of different connections. So when his sons wanted to start their company, they came to Andreessen Horowitz, where I'd gotten connected. I serve as a board partner at Andreessen Horowitz. And when they came in to pitch, Ben Horowitz, after listening to their pitch, said, "Well, Bill, you seem to know their father, so Tag, you're it. You go be the director." So I got to be the director of the 2 brothers. And their company develops APIs. And the concept is to be able to connect cars. Every automobile, every manufacturer has a different API for you to connect to their modem. Every manufacturer that has different models, every model has a different API to connect to their modems. So let's do the arithmetic here. How many car manufacturers? How many models within each car manufacturer? 75 to 100 different APIs to connect to this modem. You're never going to get any application developers to develop applications if you have to develop 75 to 100 APIs. So let's develop an API connector. So Smart Car connects to these diverse set of 75 APIs and provides an interface to the application, a common interface, common API to the application developer to develop applications that can run on cars to help them do remote locking, remote
communicating like at intersections or whatever. And
well, one of the big applications is remote charging. Understand when the remote to charge, remote charging, being able to connect, to power companies to be able to have the power company determine when you should charge your car. Maintenance, car maintenance companies. How do you know when you need to do maintenance on your car? Well, if they have an application that can monitor your car's battery, spark plugs, tires, and so forth, they can then send an email to their customer and say, "You ought to come in for a maintenance program." So all the automotive dealers, all their money is made through maintenance. Same thing, insurance companies. Insurance companies base their insurance on how many miles you drive. How did they know how many miles you drive? Well, develop an application that can monitor the odometer to tell them how many miles you drive. So that's what Smart Car does. So we're sort of getting to sort of the up-to-date Bill Krause story here. And I'm going to let you raise any questions of things that I might have missed or other things we can embellish.
Well, we've covered a lot, and there's still perhaps a lot we can cover, but I have one final question, so quote-unquote final. And that is, how would you compare and contrast the 21st century, 2025 entrepreneur with the entrepreneurs when you were setting out in 1970s and 80s? How would you...
Well, again, thank you for asking. That's a good question. It's something that's nagging at me. In fact, Jim Morgan and I got together a week or so ago to talk about just this subject. And the subject has to do more with the ethos of Silicon Valley than it does the entrepreneur, although the entrepreneurs are an artifact of the ethos. from my point of view, in the 1970s, we were building companies for the purpose of making a contribution, developing products that were unique and would add value to the customers, enabling them to run their businesses better. Secondly, we're building companies to provide employees with meaningful opportunities to have successful lives and enjoy their lives as citizens in our country. And so really sort of the dual purposes of creating products that would enable customers to run their businesses better, to improve, make contributions. And in doing so, that would enable you to provide your employees, your workforce, with a better lifestyle, to improving their overall standard of living. So that's what kind of drove us. That's what drove us. That's what drove Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard when they developed HP right from the very beginning. That's what drove us when we developed 3Com. That's what drove Ken Oshman when he did Rome. That's what drove Jimmy Trybig when he did Tandem. And you know, that's what drove Andy and Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore when they did all those guys. Steve and Mike Markla. So fast forward. What I worry about, two things. I see too many entrepreneurs who want to start a company because they want to make money. They have no clue, or very little clue, of what's the product or what's the service that's going to make a contribution or have some unique value, create some unique value proposition for a customer. They just want to make money because
they see all these rich
they see all these wealthy people, and so they want to make money starting a company, being an entrepreneur. So I worry that today's entrepreneurs are thinking about it in the wrong way. And if I go back to using myself, Bob, and my wife as examples, we had epiphanies. My epiphany was 1980s was going to be the millennium of networking of PCs. And there is no tools or products or software to enable you to do that. And so let's figure out a way to do that. My wife's epiphany of teachers don't have very good professional development programs. And so, you know, in order for an entrepreneur to be successful, in my opinion, they need to come up with an epiphany of some need that they know something about that hasn't been discovered yet by the world. And their job is to make that epiphany become true and known to the world. So that's on the entrepreneur side. The other side that I worry a little bit about are the companies themselves. And I was at an event yesterday afternoon. My wife is on the board of the YMCA of Silicon Valley. And so we were at this reception, just for the board members. And we were talking about raising money, the YMCA being able to raise money. And I was recounting that at HP, when I was going through the ranks and on, you know, my upward trajectory, I got a call from Bob Boniface one day, the person who solved my problem of being able to join HP in the beginning. He went on to become the executive vice president of HP, and one of the actually contenders to succeed Bill and Dave. But I get this call from Bob. Bob says, there's this organization in Silicon Valley called the YMCA, and they're opening up a new YMCA next door to the El Camino Hospital. And you need to go over there and learn about it, and you need to make a contribution. You need to make a donation to help them get off the ground. Okay, so I go, so we're paying you good money, and you ought to put that money to work in terms of contributing to the community. So sure enough, my wife and I go over, and we got a bunch of rooms over there named after us. Fast forward, a couple of years, another year or so later, another call from Bob. United Way is having their fundraising campaign. You need to make sure you donate to that. There was somebody from HP that was chairing the campaign. I forget his name. But the point being was HP, I use that example of their being committed to giving back to the community. And so fast forward to today, I worry that the companies today in Silicon Valley are not committed to helping the community. Now, I fully understand and appreciate these are now international companies. These are not Silicon Valley companies. I've gotten to know Sundar Pichai a little bit, God, I'm back on Larry, co-founder of Google.
Oh, Sergey and Larry. Yeah.
Come on, Larry. I'll be embarrassed.
Yeah, right.
But at any rate, I've gotten to know them. They actually wanted to buy my house. They as I've talked to them about this, they said, well, we're international companies now. We have employees all around the world. And so we have to act as an international company. And so I understand that. But your headquarters is here in Silicon Valley. You were born and founded here in Silicon Valley. So at least give some attention, some give back to the community. And I see very little of that. And so that was what Jim and I talked about whether or not we should get together with Tim Cook and Sergey and Mark, some of the others, and talk about whether or not they should pay more attention to this. But thank you for raising that question.